Hi. All right, it won't take long. So, Rodriguez, we're just doing a couple practice on the pelvic girdle to hip. So on the test, I'm going to be very specific. I'm not going to talk about these nuanced little things. It would be specifically this. How did the pelvic girdle rotation happen? Plant and then bang, left transverse pelvic girdle rotation because of left hip internal rotation. You see those toes still pointing to us? That's the internal. And then once he runs out of range of motion, he's going to externally rotate to go back to his original position. Not just, yes. Same thing, but for our left-handed hitter, watch his pelvis rotate right transverse about that right hip internal rotation. And then have Bryce Fark one that I thought was cool because Bryce puts a little extra oomph. Transverse. Now, what Bryce does here is kind of cool. He could, so remember we're talking about hip rotation with the pelvic girdle if like the hip is flexed. So what Bryce you'll see do is he could, once he gets to the end of his range of motion, he could just open chain externally rotate. But if this leg stays on the ground and your hip flexes, another way to get that external rotation after you fully internally rotate is the pelvic girdle rotate in the pelvis's frontal plane, like what we did here. If you remember that, remember how this was hip internal and external rotation? So batters can also, once they get to the end of their internal hip rotation, look at that. It's subtle, but based off of his pelvis and his hip, he's now externally rotated. So that pelvis can frontal, transverse. It's really kind of neat. Guys, that's not going to be on your test. This is going to be on your test. That be left or right transverse? Left. Good. So that's going to be on your test. Left transverse. Left transverse. All right. Let's get this off. Now let's get to our lesson for today. This. All right, guys, today's lesson, we're expanding on the pelvic girdle rotations, but we're going to go into trunk motion. So today is going to be all about the vertebrae. And that's going to tie back to the pelvis because the pelvis, remember the basketball analogy, can be spun because of stuff below it or stuff above it. So we got to talk about this stuff for us to really practice and apply pelvic girdle. So your vertebra. What do we have? And what's cool about this too is, you come in here, y'all are my regulars. Y'all come in here, we don't sit through PowerPoints. I don't hand you a bunch of stuff. We just talk. Because you know the basics, certain bones from anatomy lab. You have the basic fundamentals. Now we just get to talk and apply some of those into here. That's kind of cool. So I'm giving you props to be able to allow me to teach the way I teach because you have a little bit of background in what you need to have a background. But here we go. Here we go, our trunk. And last class I mentioned that the pelvis, right? You have your sacrum, your iliums, your sacroiliac joints. This is solid foundation. Solid. It moves a little bit, but not enough to be significant. but we want a solid bedrock to build our skyscraper upon. Okay? Now, this skyscraper, just like a literal skyscraper, it has to be stable. We don't want the skyscraper to come tumbling down. There can even be a little earthquake, and it needs to be able to withstand those forces. But it also has to be, you're not only maintaining the integrity of the system, but you have plumbing and wiring and electrical, and there's a lot of stuff. It's a metaphor and it's literal too. You have plumbing and wiring and electrical and all of the skyscraper. A lot of things in our body mimic real life. That's what I love about analogies. So a tall skyscraper is allowed, it's structurally allowed to move a little bit. If you've ever been at the top of a tall building and it's windy, it feels freaky because you could literally feel yourself shifting a little bit. If it didn't, it would crumble down. It has to move a little bit, it has to give a little bit. Where are my wrestlers / MMA fans out there? My major professor taught me something when I was at Auburn. She said, Brian, the hits that look like they're bad usually aren't as bad as the hits that don't look as bad. Because when it looks as bad, sometimes those fighters, men and women, are going with it. They're going with it to dissipate it, so it looks worse. It's the ones that don't look too bad where all that energy was put into that spot. And so it's like, well, wow, that hit didn't look too bad. Next thing you know, the person's peeled over. Okay? So it's very similar. We want to be able to sway. We want to be able to bend. So our trunk is no different. We have 7 cervical. That's going to be like the top part of the building. And these 7 cervical can move, sway, and rotate independent from the rest. The difference between cervical and thoracic is ribs. When you start to get to ribs, you call it something else. Okay? So all of your cervical can move independent from your thoracic. Your head could sway forward and back, side to side, and twist left. When you come to your thoracic, it's common for people to think that the thoracic doesn't have a lot of motion because the ribs are preventing them from moving. And that's not the case at all. Lots of motion here. The ribs, you see all this cartilage? Cartilage is very movable. So it's not like it's cemented here. It's protection. But all this cartilage allows for the ribs to rotate and sway side to side. A lot of motion you get from your thoracic. So you have 7 of these. Do you guys remember how many of these you had? 12. And what happens when you transition from thoracic to lumbar? You lose ribs. Like you don't have any more ribs. Like that's literally the only difference. So no ribs, no ribs, cervical, thoracic, lumbar. Now, just like a skyscraper, it should also make sense. As we transition up, these vertebrae are going to get less and less dense, more and more mobile, because there's less stuff, each of them. The tallest floor doesn't have to support anything but flags and a satellite, maybe. But the lowest floor has to support all the floors on top. Kind of common sense, right? So it makes sense that these lumbar are going to be very dense because they have to support everything on top, and they're going to be less mobile for that same reason. These up here, all this has to do is support my little head. It's not a lot. So they don't have to be as dense, so therefore they can be more mobile. There's a trade-off. You can hear me say this a lot when we get into muscles. There's a trade-off with stability and mobility. The more stable you are, that sounds great, but the less mobile you're going to be. The more mobile you are, that's great, the less stable you're going to be. Do we have more injuries to our shoulders or to our hips? What you think? Your instinct, yeah, heck of a lot more mobile. I don't know why I was doing very mobile. So with that trade-off comes less stability. If you want it to be more stable and be less mobile, you may not have a lot of injuries, but you're not going to be able to do as much stuff as you need. So there's always going to be trade-offs. So here's what I want to communicate first of all. When we're talking about spinal motion, we have 2 areas. We have cervical because it can only be the cervical that moves your head. So we're going to have like cervical flexion, cervical extension. I'm going to teach you the other terms. And then thoracic and lumbar, we are going to combine and call that trunk motion. The reason we don't say lumbar motion is because it makes it seem all the motion is happening in just these 5 vertebrae. And it's not, it's a combination. But we can't separate what is thoracic and what is lumbar. In other words, they're kind of working all together to sum the dominoes to get your trunk to move. So unlike the cervical that's totally isolated, we know that all that contribution is from these 7. When you do this, that contribution is from these 12 and 5. So we say trunk. Some people will say lumbar, but my biomechanics people say, well, that's inferring that all the motion is happening here. Okay, so I just wanted to communicate why. All right, so we have trunk and we have cervical. Instead of, I use the analogy for the skyscraper because structurally it kind of makes sense. You have all these floors, you have all these vertebrae, you have first floor, second floor, third floor. But I like to think of movement practically as a tree, like a big tree that can sway with the wind and still not break. You know, the tree, if a tree didn't sway with the strong winds, it would probably break more often. Right? If winds are strong enough, it might anyway. But if a tree can sway, go bend with it, it's kind of how the trunk works. Literally our trunk and the trunk of a tree. So there's going to be 4 kinds of bends, and then I'm going to teach you 2 types of twists for the transverse one. First one you already know about, sagittal plane, flexion bend and extension bend, into fetal, out of fetal, a bend with the trunk flexion, trunk extension. We also know that it can look like this, but it can also look like this. When I posteriorly pelvic girdle rotate, that's taking the lower part and bending it like this. So like doing a crunch would be like traditional bending. But doing a reverse crunch, y'all know what I'm talking about, a reverse crunch? That would still be flexion and extension, just moving the lower part about the upper. It'd be the same bend. Regular crunch, reverse crunch, still flexion. Flexion, extension, flexion, extension. Okay. Remember, there's no hyper except if it's excessive beyond normal motion. Or you guys heard the term hypermobility. I mean, that's excessive mobility beyond normal range of motion. So this isn't trunk flexion, trunk extension, hyperextension. If that's normal motion, it's just extension. Flexion from, extension to, extension from, flexion to. Okay. Now let's talk about side-to-side sway. When I was young, I used to sway, oh, sway, oh. Nobody remembers that song. So let's talk about how we're swaying. Guys, it's the same thing as this. Sway, sway, but just in the trunk's frontal plane. That's all it is. Just a different type of sway. We can sway to our right. We can sway to our left. When the trunk sways to the right, let's think about landmarks. My right shoulder, when it sways to the right, is going to get closer to my right hip. When I sway to the left shoulder is going to get closer to my left hip. Now, here's the trade-off. Swaying from anatomical, easy to see, got closer. But if this one got closer, this one got further away. So if I have left to anatomical, technically these got closer. left lateral from, left lateral to, right lateral to, right lateral from, left lateral to, left lateral from, right lateral to, right lateral from. So we call this trunk bending. Used to call it flexion, lateral flexion. And I think the verbiage got changed because, again, flexion, we want to reserve that for sagittal. Kind of makes it more confusing if we're using a road in a different position. It'd be like being on I-20 and saying it's north 10. Is it 10? No, right? Let's not call it 10. So we have right and left lateral bending of our trunk. Landmarks. Landmarks. The landmarks we want to use are either shoulders and hips. Do you remember in anatomy, our anterior, superior iliac spines and those kind of things? Just your hips, your hip bones on your pelvis. Is that so? Time to. I'm on. Right lateral from, left lateral to, left lateral from. Now, going back to the pelvis, if this looks like it's moving, and it is, it can look like it's not moving, but it is. If I keep my shoulders level, but instead of doing this, I do this. Yeah, well, how in the world would you do that? Well, yeah, that doesn't really happen with trees, but it can happen with us because our roots on our tree are connected to something that can move. Our legs can literally move our foundation about which our building. It's like having a building on a foundation, but the foundation could move around. Opelousas could come visit Lafayette. It's not normal. That's why this stuff is kind of hard to see sometimes. But look, all I'm showing you is if right lateral is right shoulder gets closer to right hip, then right lateral would also be right hip getting closer to right shoulder. It's the same bend. This is the same trunk bend as this. Left lateral, left lateral. Same bend. Instead of left shoulder went visit left hip, we just said, hey, left hip went visit left shoulder. Remember from a month ago where I used the kin doll on the board and I was like, hey, go forward could be kin moves about the board, but the board moved back to kin. But they still move the same way. Same thing. So if we were tying it all together and I did something like this, I brought my left hip up. There's a lot of stuff that happened. Right hip abduction, right lateral pelvic girdle rotation, and left lateral trunk bending. Now, why would you want to bend your trunk? Because if I didn't, if I said, hey, trunk, I want you to stay in anatomical position. I don't want any shoulder to get closer to any hip while I hike this hip up, well, then you're going to be in a little teapot. By bending your trunk to your left, you're able to keep your shoulders level, you're able to keep your eyes level, you're able to keep your work level. Now, I know what you probably want to do. When am I ever going to just be, hey man, so enjoy the game? No, I'm just pretending like I'm in this position. Like, yeah, it's a good game Saturday. Man. Can't believe we came back to one. Maybe not, but in everyday activity, we do this. All right, when we walk, it's not as, I'm using these extreme examples, but when we walk, we have lateral pelvic girdle rotation because of hips. And when we move our pelvis, some of them isn't as obvious as others. So in other words, when we're walking, we're going to be using lateral pelvic girdle to help lift our hip up just a little bit as we swing through so we don't hit our foot on the ground. Make sense? Some people really exaggerate the lateral pelvic girdle rotation. Like if you were watching a festival pageant and the people walking throwing those hips out. When you hear that, that's lateral pelvic girdle rotation. Bang! That's all it is. So if you're stepping and you want to throw that hip out this way, that's a shift. The spin is right lateral. You get it? But the trunk, if the trunk went along for the ride, again, you'd be a little teapot. So how do we, when you're driving on a car on a bumpy road, you have shocks that help keep you level while the car is doing. That's what a lot of this stuff is. Our trunk and our neck are like a sway. It's like shocks. So when something's trying to take us out from being level, we can recurve back the other way to keep our eyes and hands level. So my trunk, as my pelvis is trying to bring everything up top to the right, my trunk is going to bend back to the left. My left shoulder got closer to my left hip. You see it? Any questions before we move on? This helps to explain that example we did Friday where you're standing in line for a long time and you put all your weight on one leg. Your pelvis, let's say if my weight's on my right leg, my pelvis is tilted left lateral. Well, if my trunk stayed straight, I'd be in line like this. So my trunk is going to bend back to my right so that my shoulder line and my eyes stay low. As your bodies want to keep your eyes level. And functionally, you want to keep your shoulders level as well, because you never know when you have to do stuff. So one way that happens is as my foundation wants to bend me one way, my trunk can lean back the other. Now, sometimes you want your trunk to bend with your pelvis, but that's usually very practical. For example, if I need to pick up something off of the ground, and I have right lateral pelvic because of left hip add, right hip add, I might say, oh, thanks for repositioning me, getting me a little bit further to the ground. Hey, trunk, can you help me go down a little further? My trunk said, absolutely, I can bend to my right to help you grab whatever you need. So they can go in the same direction, but it's usually for a very specific reason, for grabbing something off of the ground. Sense? All right, let's get to transverse. So that's where the money's at. The landmarks I want you to recognize for here is sternum and pubis. Front of the ribs and the front of the pelvis. These are my landmarks. All right, guys. Watch this. Watch this. Watch this. This is not transverse trunk rotation. Nor is this. This is transverse trunk rotation. You see the deviation between the sternum and the pubis. So those two examples were like this. In the first one, I had right transverse pelvic girdle rotation because of hip motion, but my sternum and my pubis stayed in line. So in other words, in baseball, it's common to think that they may be rotating their trunk. They're probably not. Once they're done, they may rotate their trunk to help slow down. But we can't assume that just because I saw the sternum move, that there was differentiation. Sternum and pubis, local landmarks, not global landmarks. Keep it in here. So our two types of spin, spin to the right, spin to the left. I could do that with my whole body, or I could do that with my cervical, or I could do that with a trunk, or I could do that with my pelvis. It's the same concept. Spin to the right, spin to the left. So the two types of spin, right transverse trunk rotation, left transverse trunk rotation. Why do we add the transverse? Well, because right and left can have two different meanings in two different planes. Right, left, lateral. So we have to have right, left, transverse. We can't just say right. Right how? Right in the frontal or right in the transverse? Right transverse trunk, left transverse trunk. Grace, back me up on this point. If you are in anatomical position, your sternum will literally be looking at your pubis, lined up. If you are twisted to your right, your sternum is going to be looking at your right hip. And if your sternum is left transverse rotated, your sternum has to be looking at your left hip. That's a cheat sheet. So let me give you a practical example. Start here. And your question is, how did the trunk rotate? Based off of local landmarks that I just taught you. Figure it out. Using landmarks. Start. Finish. Y'all remember Saturday Night Live, those old episodes with Chris Farley where he's living in a van down by the river? I'm Matt Foley. Yes, I gotta ask my boys what non-boomers are watching. Landmarks. What hip is my sternum looking at? How does my trunk have to be twisted? My trunk has to be twisted to the right. Let me show you. My trunk has nothing to do with my arms. My trunk has nothing to do with my knees or my hips. And if I said, hey, trunk, rotate traditionally to go back home, my trunk would have to twist to the left to go back to line up. That means my trunk had to twist to the right when it left. Campbell, how did that happen? I didn't see your trunk rotate. Because one of the cool things about this education is that I'm trying to show you that trunk rotation is this or that. Traditional, non-traditional. And the clues is, where am I at? Where did I go? How did I have to move to get there? Cap and bottle. If you have a bottle, even if you don't, it's a simple concept with your cap and your bottle. You hear lefty loosey, righty tighty. That only works because you're probably going to open the bottle by moving the small cap lefty loosey. But you can also open that bottle by spinning the bottle to the right. Just why would you do that? We usually move the small piece about the big piece. The human body doesn't play those things. We commonly move big pieces about small pieces. So this is what I want you to think about. If the joint motion is called open and close, I can open by moving the cap, spin it to the left, but I could get the same motion by spinning the bottle to the right. I get the same change. So what I did is I showed you that this, moving the cap, is the exact same thing as this when I move the bottle, because it gets me to the same place. So in that example, I did have left transverse pelvic girdle rotation. but I have right transverse trunk rotation. Did the cap spin? How did the bottle spin? And then what was the overall motion? Did it open or did it close? Does that make sense? Guys, I'm telling you, this is weird, but it's going to get better with practice. While we practice. Okay. Any questions before we get into some more practice examples? Are these helping? Okay. Let's go to a familiar face. Not literally, but we've done this example before. And what if we started here, and instead of doing this, what if I did this? See what just happened? And it's subtle. But my pelvis did this, but my trunk went along for the ride. But if I didn't want to not look forward, if I wanted to keep my sternum facing forward, I have to twist my trunk. See the subtleness? My sternum is looking here. Now my sternum is looking there. My trunk had to twist to its left. Had to. Because if my trunk went back home, I'd have to twist to the right to line back up. So I had to twist to my left to get in this new position. We watched some football yesterday. Well, the Saints played ball. Could have been worse. Think about this. You're watching football or soccer, and you're backpedaling and you're turning to run. If your trunk didn't move to allow you these functional tasks, call it functional circles of sight or reach. Reach when you need to keep your hands in one place. Watch, for example, you type in, sight. I'm looking at something. I want to keep looking at something. Look behind me. We need to see all those contributing factors. So what keeps you looking forward? So here's the question, or here's the example. You're backpedaling and you go to turn and run. It may not look like your trunk rotating. Now remember, I'm not talking, this isn't a disrespect to all the other things happening. It's just we're having a trunk conversation right now. You can talk about all the other stuff. But we're just having trunk conversations. We analyze joint by joint. Someone who's not trained in this stuff would be like, how in the world did your trunk rotate? Your shoulders are still facing forward. How in the world did your trunk rotate? Your sternum is still facing forward. And that's when you're going to say, well, that's a really good point. But as someone who has studied human movement under Dr. Campbell, I can definitively say that your shoulders had to rotate, because if they didn't, this is what would have happened. You can see it in my clothes. The clues in the clothing. You see these wrinkles here, not here. Don't look here. Here. You didn't see that when I was upright. Because my trunk twisted. If my trunk didn't twist, to me, and again, I'm going to let Grace speak about her perspective. The easiest thing is to see the change in the landmarks. My sternum went from being in the middle, looking at my pubis. Now my sternum is looking at my right hip. There's only one way that can happen, is if my trunk twisted to the right. Grace, anything to add?
Yeah, I agree. I think the landmarks are a bit totally confusing. I think what I used to do was like, if I'm twisted this way, how do I get to that way? Trace my steps. But I think the local landmarks is like more.
Landmarks are great. Landmarks are never going to lie to you. But you know what will lie to you? The room. The room perspective is going to mess with you. All right, how about we do a couple practice examples? Okay, guys? If I could get this one. Any questions so far? What's coming is I'm gonna do this lecture when I'm on the road and post it for you guys. All the cervical is just this concept shifted up. That's all it is. So instead of sternum to pubis, we're just looking sternum to nose or chin, and we're looking for the same deviations. I went from chin to sternum. Hey, that's my right shoulder. You know what I'm saying? It's like if I was batting, start off looking at my left. A non-trained person would say, well, your head didn't move at all. But you guys are going to be like, that's interesting. Because your head had to move. Because if it didn't, you'd still be looking at your left shoulder. You had to spin your head to the right. Those are the things we're going to be working on for the next few days, okay? When I give this example, we're going to have the flow over. I'm going to do the windshield wiper. All right, everybody, here's your first question of the day. We'll start off easy. We'll start off position. How is her trunk positioned? Don't answer it right away. Give it some thought so that everybody kind of has the same amount of time to think. The question is, how is her trunk positioned? On the test, I'm going to say things like anatomical position, right transverse rotated, left transverse rotated, right transverse rotated. It's always fun when students answer questions on where that is. It's that big. So before, well, maybe not, maybe you guys, and that's awesome. But do you see what I'm trying to do? I'm trying to teach us the tools to be confident to say, I know how they're twisted. I'm not guessing. In 415, we're going to go beyond core. You won't have to say, well, I really don't know exactly which muscle, so I'm just going to say core to everything. We're going to beyond that. We're exactly what we're working. We're going to know exactly how we're moving because we have the tools to be able to figure it out. Is her sternum looking at her right or left hip? Her left hip. So she has to be twisted to her left. Watch this. Watch this. Yeah, take pictures. Watch this. I'm going to make an idiot of myself. That's what I do. All for your education. Watch this. One day I'm going down and I'm staying down. So how about we have like let's say if I go down, I'm eating, let's say pineapple ice cream or something in belly. Watch, guys. Watch this. Watch this. Watch this. That's her position. Twist it to the left. Twist it to the left. And the reason, not you, because y'all are my everydayers. Y'all are here to learn. Appreciate that. People watching from home, y'all are there, the people that watch it every day. I appreciate that. But can you see how some people would say her trunk's not twisted at all because her sternum's facing the ceiling? That's exactly what people are going to say. When I go over this test, that's going to be on your test. Maybe not that exact picture, but the same concept. And someone's going to go over their test and they're going to be like, I don't understand why the trunk's twisted. The sternum's still facing the wall. I'm going to be like, it beat. God did them. So I think it's important that sometimes we remind ourselves why our brains want to tell us one thing. And we say, no, brain. We're retraining you. Retraining you to look at it for what it is. Does that make sense? All right, let's get to a more advanced one. Question over there. I want you to tell me the specific motions, pelvic girdle and trunk. Two separate questions. And we're going to go from the top picture as our start, the bottom picture is our finish, because that arrow is inferring the motions. How did the pelvic girdle rotate, and how did her trunk rotate? As always, think of it on your own, but then I would love you to share your answer with someone next to you. Because if you all have different answers, that's what learning happens. I'm so random. I was like, now I kind of still need the picture to answer. So, if we started at the top, what I'm going to do, just like I taught you on the first test, where are you at? Then the next picture, where are you at now? Where did you go? How did you have to move to get there? Pelvic girdle, I can see pretty clean, right transverse. Pelvic girdle. The trunk, though, is tricky, so that's why I want to use my landmarks. I started out twisted to my right. Does that make sense? Sternum's looking at the right hip. She has to be rotated to her. Well, in the next picture, she's not rotated at all. So the only way to go from being twisted to your right back to anatomical is to have left transverse trunk rotation. That makes sense. Right transverse pelvic with left transverse trunk is like cap and bottle. You can't open the bottle if both things spin the same way. You won't have joint motion. Let me, before we set you free, this is the schedule. This is fall break week. I am going to be leaving for West Virginia to call that military veterans auction. However, we still have something for our everydayers. Grace, Lindsay, Emma are going to have a workshop where you come in, we practice these things. I'm going to be on Zoom to answer any questions, to give more practice. The Zoom is going to be cool because you get that information whether you're here or not. So if you want to come in, work, get some extra practice, I'll even have some extra questions that I could throw in that we could talk about. And then office hours, Grace, I'm going to send y'all an email, but Grace is going to handle my office hours for this week. But guys, office hours. Y'all know darn well, y'all have my cell phone, and you are literally able to contact me. If I'm awake, I want to answer your question. And I told you this before, this is important to me because with your work schedules, with your family schedules, you may only be able to study on Thursday evenings at 8 o'clock. And if you have a question that's preventing you from progressing, I want to get that answered so you don't have to wait till Monday. All right, we're good? All right, guys, I hope y'all had fun today. Y'all take care.